esta hermosa imagen de San Vicente y las Granadinas, uno de los países del Caribe oriental. Comenzamos este programa de Poder en América y le doy la bienvenida a mi compañera Ola Malaz de Mayadeen. Bienvenida.
شكرا لك أبراهام، وطبعا كل الشكر لقناة تيليسور لهذه الاستضافة على هذه الجزيرة الرائعة والخلابة، بل أكثر من ذلك لها تاريخ نضالي. وطبعا مرحبا بكم مشاهدينا واهلا وسهلا الى هذه الحلقه الجديده من بودير معا نستطيع.
La Organización de Naciones Unidas asegura que toda América Latina y el Caribe crecerá económicamente en este año 2017. Lo que no define es qué motor va a impulsar exactamente ese crecimiento. Las autoridades de San Vicente y las Granadinas sí tienen bien definido cuál será el camino que van a recorrer para garantizar el bienestar de todos sus ciudadanos y de toda la nación.
من سان فينسنت هذه الجزيرة العضو في مجموعة الكاريبي، سنتحدث اليوم عن هذه المجموعة، عن دورها في تخفيف الأزمات وماذا قدمت بالتالي لدول أمريكا اللاتينية. سنتحدث أيضا عن الصراعات ومخططات الغزو الاقتصادي التي تستغل مقدرات وخيرات وموارد الشعوب وتفرض قيودها على عالم الجنوب، حيث يشهد العالم اليوم تكتلات وتجمعات للتكامل الاقتصادي والاندماج الثقافي وأيضا لمواجهة السياسات العالمية الليبرالية المتوحشة على رأسها طبعا مجموعة دول الكاريبي ومنها البريكس والألبا وغيرها. للأسف أبراهام، رغم توفر كل الموارد فعليا في عالمنا العربي، إلا أنه حتى الآن استحال الوصول إلى تكتل موحد وقوي لحماية الإنسان والفرد في هذه المجتمعات، ما يشكل طبعا قوة وحماية وتحصين. على أي حال مشاهدينا الكرام في العالم العربي وأمريكا اللاتينية، من هذه الجزيرة الخلابة ننطلق.
Aprovecharemos estos espacios abiertos para entrevistar a una de las autoridades de este país y para que ustedes conozcan más del Caribe. Bienvenidos.
مشاهدينا في العالم وتحديدا مشاهدينا في العالم العربي، إذا أمكن أن نشرح لهم أين نحن الآن وماذا عن طبيعة واستراتيجية هذه المنطقة أيضا.
El Caribe se caracteriza por el mar. Es el corazón y es lo que mueve a los países de esta región. Esto que estamos viendo acá es el corazón de San Vicente y las Granadinas, lugar, la vía principal por donde se mueve su proceso comercial y incluso por donde entra y sale la gente, por el mar principalmente. Bueno, este es el puerto donde se encuentra la llegada de los ferries, donde atracan también algunos de los barcos que van y vienen a otros países cercanos a este lugar, y es el centro de la capital, de San Vicente y las Granadinas. Aquí mismo están asentados todos los lugares, edificios donde están los gobiernos, todas las casas de gobierno, y también están allí las características principales, todos los montañosos, su vegetación, la gente vive en esas montañas, y así está arriba está el fuerte Charlotte, que es también uno de los puntos históricos más importantes de San Vicente y las Granadinas, y desde ahí es donde les vamos a contar la historia de uno de nuestros invitados que tenemos el día de hoy. Esa es.
شكرا لك أبراهام.
These guns were placed here. The British had built this fort in the late 1800s. And the guns, as you can see, are turned inland. And the British, in its effort to conquer the original people, were in the 18th and 17th, 18th century, the British were lords of the sea. They controlled the sea, but they wanted this land. So they built this fort, and they had like about a number of cannons. Not many of them are still here, but they were all turned in on the people. The French had a foothold further down on the western side of the country, and the original Garifuna Kalinago people had controlled the eastern and central regions. But they would come to take the lands back from the British, and the British would train the guns on them and attempted to blow them away. So that's what this is about.
Ya estamos en el Fuerte Charlotte, es un punto simbólico en la historia de San Vicente y las Granadinas, y vamos a hablar de este país y de su vinculación con el resto de los países del Caribe y de toda la América Latina con Jomo Thomas. Él es Speaker of the House of the Assembly, que es un equivalente al presidente del Parlamento. Mr. Thomas, gracias por estar con nosotros. Quiero preguntarle, ¿cuál ha sido el punto que ha marcado el cambio que han vivido estos países del Caribe, hablando del caso específico de San Vicente y las Granadinas, para registrar un crecimiento de su proceso económico y de su proceso social?
Well, the Caribbean, particularly CARICOM, is a group of 14 countries, very small countries, but St. Vincent is one of the smallest of them. And they have, in terms of economic development, we have gone through a whole process over the Treaty of Chaguaramas, which brought into being CARICOM, which is the CARICOM community, economic community. We have had a whole series of different economic processes. For example, in the early 70s, we had the government of Michael Manley, People's National Party in Jamaica, talking about democratic socialism. By 1979, we had the People's Revolutionary Government of Maurice Bishop experimenting with different social change. We have had people like Eric Williams in Trinidad, Errol Bauer in Barbados, Forbes Bonham and Shelley Jagan in Guyana, and certainly here in St. Vincent, over the last 16 years, we have had the leadership of Prime Minister Al Gonzalez, all of them looking at ways in which we can transform these post-colonial, post-slave societies into societies where people can develop and where people can see the benefits of their labor. It has been a long struggle, but there have been some advances.
طيب سيد توماس، إذا ما أردنا الحديث عن أهمية اليوم هذه الدول وهذه المجموعات تحديدا بالنسبة لدول الجنوب، وكيف يمكن التنسيق والتعاون فيما بين دول المساس والسيادة؟
Well, one of the central issues in international law, and certainly in regional relationships between the Caribbean and South America, Latin America, is non-interference in the internal affairs of all of these societies. And one of the things that CARICOM has tried to do, Caribbean countries have tried to do as a grouping, is to coordinate its foreign policy and to take positions which are in keeping with the best interests of the Caribbean. So leaders historically in the Caribbean have always tried to coordinate, have always tried to respect the territorial integrity of different societies, have respected the particular national trajectory which individual leaders and countries would want to take. The key, I think, beginning, a lot of the work came in an online movement and the leadership of Fidel Castro from 1979, and that whole emphasis on South-South dialogue, South-South relationships, which were intended to draw on the enormous power of all of the countries in the South to show solidarity with each other and to help in benefiting, see how each country can help the other. And the smaller countries, the countries that are less endowed, benefit from the more developed countries and so on. So I would say that in the Caribbean, there has been that respect. There's more and more of a South-South dialogue now. A lot of this has gained tremendous impetus with the emergence of the Bolivarian Revolution, with the emergence and presidency of President Chavez, and since his demise, the continuation of that policy with President Maduro.
La dependencia política que tienen muchos de estos países del Caribe, y tomando en consideración el caso específico de San Vicente y las Granadinas, con el Reino Unido desde el punto de vista político, ¿ha impedido que estos países tengan la posibilidad de dar el salto de desarrollo definitivo solo por esa dependencia política, o no tiene ningún tipo de influencia?
In fact, just last week, there was a United Nations meeting on decolonization here in St. Vincent. St. Vincent, well, not here in St. Vincent, but the Caribbean particularly, we still have probably more dependencies here in the Caribbean than for any other place in the world. And the struggle for independence, which really took impetus in the 60s and 70s, and most of the countries that are now in CARICOM are independent countries. There are a number of others. There's Anguilla, there's Sabre, there's Saint Eustatius, there's Turks and Caicos, there's the British Virgin Islands. All of these are still dependencies. What the people in those societies would say is anyone's guess. I know that those of us in St. Vincent who emerged in the 60s and 70s were always willing and ready to struggle for independence and to fight for independence, because we wanted to delock, to delink, to reclaim our patrimony from the British. That we have done, and a number of countries in the Caribbean have done that. But it is not for me to say what the people in the dependencies would want or how they would choose to develop. What I know is that those countries, I doubt very much that any of the countries, independent countries in CARICOM, would want to go back to a dependent relationship, whether it is with the British or the new major power, the United States. I don't think any of them would want to go back.
سيد توماس، يتطلب نجاح هذه المجموعات اليوم مقومات أساسية لنجاحها وبالتالي أيضا لاستمراريتها. بداية، ما هي هذه المقومات وهل هي مرتبطة نوعا ما بالسياسة؟
Well, CARICOM led by political individuals and leaders of political parties, political institutions. So certainly politics is an impetus for whatever they do. And like I said, in 1974, CARICOM, which is the CARICOM community, emerged as a result of the Treaty of Chaguaramas. And that process of integration has continued to develop over time. We have had all of these countries, they became independent, they became part of the United Nations, they became part of the Organization of American States, they became part of the Group of 77 in the UN, and now there are all kinds of integrations taking place. We see, for example, that in order to continue development, again, particularly since the emergence of the Bolivarian Revolution, headed and led by President Chavez, we have had the emergence of ALBA, which is an institution that deals with alternative economic development. We have countries in some of the English-speaking countries in the Organization of Eastern Caribbean States. As I said, they are part of CARICOM. I think the politics certainly drives it. In 2008, we had what was called a CSME, Caribbean Single Market and Economy. And that got a lot of impetus in 2008, 2009, 2010. For whatever reason, the leaders have fallen back on that integrative process, because I still believe that in the end of the day, there's a lot of fiefdom mentality among some of the political leaders. They don't want to give up some of their independence, because as it stands now, everyone is a king in his little island. I'm not so sure that some of the leaders are willing to give that up yet. But even as we talk about that, though, I think that the fundamental questions having to do with development also has to do with ideology and politics. Because if you, as we have seen, and we've certainly seen over the last 30, 40 years, where neoliberal policies of development have taken hold, And when we look back at the Caribbean, or when we look at many of the countries in the South, the neoliberal policies which seem to make a very tiny majority very rich don't seem to have that trickle-down impact and effect on the broader masses of people. And this is why I think there have been efforts in Jamaica under Manley, there's been efforts, Maurice Bishop and the New Jewel movement to try to radically transform, and certainly we have seen that under the Bolivarian Revolution in Venezuela. Certainly we have seen efforts in Nicaragua with the Sandinistas, we have seen it certainly with the Cubans over the last half century. But all of these are different efforts to try to unify society, to integrate society, to help them develop, and certainly depending on the political will and the political ideology of the leader, to see how they can bring more and more benefits to the broad masses of people.
A través de estos mecanismos de integración, los países del Caribe han decidido tener una posición mucho más fuerte y firme en el mundo, en el sistema internacional, en el sistema político internacional. ¿Por qué razón? ¿Qué busca el Caribe para hacerse sentir en el mundo entero? ¿Y cuál es la posición que tiene el Caribe frente a conflictos como el que se vive en Siria o en Yemen, por ejemplo?
I think it depends on the political will of the leadership of the individual countries. I don't think CARICOM or all of the leaders are very much interested in making forays into international politics. Some of them are quite parochial. They want to be concerned about their own national development. But, you know, I think one great leader said one time that many of us may not be interested in politics, but politics is very much interested in us. And because of that dialectic, I think more and more, as the world becomes closer with globalization and everything else, leaders are forced to make positions. I know that we have had a very strong, here in St. Vincent, our leadership led by Prime Minister Ralph Gonsalves has had a very, very strong position as it relates to the Bolivarian Revolution. Our Prime Minister made a very strong statement recently in terms of calling on leaders in CARICOM not to allow themselves to be splintered, because that's the effort of the more powerful, the more imperial countries, to split countries into, try to break the solidarity, try to break the unity. And we saw that around the issue of Venezuela recently. And our Prime Minister has been very, very forceful in doing that. As it relates to Syria, as it relates to Palestine, I know many people in St. Vincent has had a very, very strong position on Palestine as a way of expressing solidarity with the Palestinian people. We saw what happened in Libya. We see what is happening now in Syria. So clearly, a lot of times, I am of the view, certainly, and I can't speak for the government, but I can speak for myself as someone who has been involved ever since I was 14 years old, that what sometimes is projected as people's revolution is really a cover for regime change. It is really a cover where people want to destroy and to turn back certain processes. And we have all kind of machinations and so on by more powerful countries to try to build an internal opposition, to force governments to change their policies, to try to redirect many countries in ways which are inimical to the broad masses of people. So I am certain that that's what happened in Libya for sure. I am certain that's what the effort is currently as it relates to Venezuela. And this is why I am certainly of the view that we have to educate people, we have to communicate with people, we have to get them to understand that more often than not, when ideas are projected in terms of democracy and freedoms and so on, we have to look behind that facade to see what the real agenda is. Because a lot of times that's a cover for, to speak more bluntly, a cover for counter-revolution.
إذا مشاهدينا فاصل قصير ونعود بعده لمتابعة هذه الحلقة من بودير مع نستطيع من جزيرة سانت فينسنت. انتظرونا. مشاهدينا نحن معكم حاليا من جزيرة سانت فينسنت، مستمرين بحلقة قدر معا نستطيع، وتحديدا نحن في البوتانيكال جاردنز، ومعنا المرشد السياحي في هذه الحديقة للتعريف أكثر عنها وعن جماليتها مستر ألفونسو روك. أهلا وسهلا بك معنا. إذا أمكن أن تعرفنا أكثر على هذه الحديقة الجميلة.
This is one of the oldest botanical gardens in the Western Hemisphere. It's 252 years old. Then we have 20 acres of natural beauty. We have trees from different parts of the world make what we have here. This is the center walk of the botanical garden. This tree will shed all the leaves, if you notice, and then it made big bunches of yellow flowers all over. So we call it yellow cassia or the sausage tree. This is called cannonball flower. We call it the cannonball tree, but we call it, in other words, you can see a comb, a brush, and a mirror. And it lasts for 1 day only, but it's day all year round, it never stops bearing. So we call it the cannonball flower. Folks go right and stand up inside. We call in there the jungle. So folks come right into the jungle here. Folks come right into the jungle here and have their picture taken. This is called gummy bomb, as in rubber. We don't have much of these trees, but just 1 or 2 for botanical purposes and for visitors as well. And if we have lots of these, we can extract the rubber for making motor car tires. So, yeah. Go again. Now this tree is called the naked Indian. Now this is old as the botanical garden. It's 252 years old. Most visitors, when they come, they like to stand by the trunk of the tree and have the picture taken. And when they get back home, they can say, well, I'm standing by the oldest tree in the botanical garden. Yeah, this is called cinnamon spice. That is the tree right over there. Now you can use the bush for making tea, and then you can get the stick from the branches, then you can make the powder one that you can put in eggnog, you can put in pudding, you can put in cake, you can put in lots of different things. That's the cinnamon spice we use for lots of different things. This garden made up with trees from different parts of the world.
سيد توماس، إذا ما أردنا الحديث قليلا عن دول العالم العربي، اليوم أنتم عضو في هذه المجموعات، برأيكم كيف يمكن للدول العربية أن تستفيد من هذه التجربة أيضا في الكاريبي لتؤسس تكتل اقتصادي موحد وقوي كما في هذه المجموعات؟ وأيضا نسألكم يعني هل لديكم أي تعاون وتنسيق مع دول العالم العربي، وهي تحت أي شكل من الأشكال؟
Well, I know that here in St. Vincent from very early, beginning with the emergence of the Ralph Gonsalves administration in 2001, there was an effort to link with the former President Colonel Gaddafi in Libya. I think in September of 2000, PM Gonsalves won first in March of 2001, and in September of that, in October of that year, he had traveled over to Tripoli to meet with President Gaddafi. I know that in the broad international arena, certainly in the Group of 77, non-aligned movement, there have been linkages with the leadership in Egypt, in Jordan. I don't think the relationship is as organic as it should be. I don't think it's as strong as it should be. But certainly, if we're talking about South-South dialogue, there has to be an effort to integrate the entire world to do the things that are necessary to ensure that the problems of the people become front and center, and that all of the great minds in the world would sit down and try to solve those problems. So certainly there is need for more and more integration. There's need for more and more coordination among all of these countries to develop an integration between Caribbean countries and Arab countries. Because I think in the end, the problems facing the people are the same. And in many, many respects, some of the solutions that we may come up with may not only be beneficial to people in the Middle East, but certainly here for people in the Caribbean.
El cambio climático es una de las principales amenazas que tienen estos países del Caribe. Y Estados Unidos acaba de bloquear una propuesta que había en el Grupo de los 7, en el G7, para tratar de resolver, por lo menos amainar los problemas del impacto que tiene el cambio climático en el mundo. Pero los países más afectados, como los del Caribe, por ejemplo, seguirán siendo afectados, pero Estados Unidos no tanto. ¿Cómo ven desde el Caribe esa situación?
Many countries in the Caribbean, and certainly for many countries in the world, and even for certain parts of the United States, the issue of climate change is an existential issue. For certain, in the Caribbean, we have climate change is a major problem, and it has been given a lot of currency in this country. I can tell you, for example, that every year, ever so often, we have had floods, we have had drought, we have had heavy rains that have not only created damage that run into the millions of dollars, we have lost lives, and the frequency with which these are coming, we can clearly see that there's a connection between climate change and the changing weather patterns. So we have spent, sometimes you get developmental assistance or you mobilize your own resources to correct a particular problem, a particular set of destructions that came on. But the next year, the devastation is even greater. So we know here in the Caribbean that we must join forces and make the issue of climate change and the response to climate change one of vital importance. But what do we have? We have in the White House, in the United States, someone who disregards the issue of climate change. And that creates a major threat, because if the United States is one of the most powerful countries in the world and one of the countries that can give development assistance and really should be leading the process, is now a climate change denier, it makes the issue of climate change even more existential, because smaller countries like ours in the Caribbean, certainly countries in the Middle East that may not have the same amount of resources, would now have to double down even more to fight for themselves, to fight for themselves, to not only do mitigation, but to do prevention work. And it's an alarming situation, to say the least. But it is one that I think that we have to be optimists. We have to keep on fighting. We have to keep on educating. We have to keep on uniting the people, because it is only through education and organization and unity that the people's interests would triumph.
سيد توماس، إذا ما أردنا تقييم اليوم تجربة هذه المجموعات، إذا ما أردنا الحديث عن نقاط القوة ونقاط الضعف أيضا، وكيف يمكن لهذه المجموعات اليوم أن تنهض وتقف بوجه كل ما تتعرض له ربما هذه الدول، ودومينيكا وفنزويلا أكبر مثال على ذلك.
Well, the group can fight. The question is whether some of the leaders have the will to fight, or whether some of the leaders see the need to fight. I think that to a large extent, the problems which are faced in the Caribbean are problems which people see, including leaders, see as natural and as inevitable. I believe that ever so often we have leaders who do not believe that these problems are either natural and inevitable. And as a consequence, they try to come with a different perspective. They want to change. They want to do things differently. But that attempt to change is always met by tremendous resistance. So what we have in Venezuela is an attempt to change things for the better as it relates to the people, the broad masses of the people. But many times, to attempt to change things in the interest of the people is to bring into sharp relief and to sharp conflict a set of class forces, national forces, and some people will push back against that. So in Venezuela you have attempts to change, and certainly you have an internal ruling class in Venezuela that may not want to see things change in that kind of way. Plus you have an international alignment of class forces that may not want to see. Because in many respects sometimes what we have is an example. You have an example of a strong leader. You have an example of a leader who wants to do more and more things for people. And the question is, that example may be a good example for the people in Grenada or in Jamaica as in Manly, Grenada as in Maurice Bishop, Fidel Castro, or Raúl Castro in Cuba, the Ortega brothers in Nicaragua. But what does that mean for the ruling class of that country? What does that mean for the ruling elite in the region and in the world? Because we still have an international economic architecture that is dominated by capital. We still have a structure that is primarily in the hands of private people for private ownership and control. And you have some leaders who want to wrest that away and to lend more assistance and more help and more benefits to the people. That is the conflict, I think, that has to be resolved. Whether all of the leaders would want to do that is another thing. I don't think the Caribbean is there yet. In fact, I don't think most of the leaders want to. I mean, in a broad electoral construct, they may do certain things that may redound to the benefit of the people. But I don't think that, to a large extent, the leadership in the region is ready to make a radical break with an economic architecture that does not serve the interests of the people and to try to engage in alternative arrangements. I don't think that we are there yet.
¿Qué cambió en San Vicente y las Granadinas desde ese momento en el que apareció Chávez y la revolución bolivariana dentro del mundo político?
A lot has changed, particularly economic change. I can't say that a lot has changed in the politics, but certainly in the economic realm. Because I speak without a shadow of a doubt. Had it not been for the emergence of President Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution, the airport that you guys landed on today would not have been in existence, because the Venezuelans and the Cubans played a key role in building the international airport. There are Caribe, which came as a direct result of the initiative of President Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution. We have gotten a tremendous amount of assistance, which has helped us to build the airport, to build storage tanks, to do a lot of social beneficial work for the people that run into tens of millions of dollars. So economically, the St. Vincent, the process in Venezuela has been a boon for small, underdeveloped, struggling economically St. Vincent and the Grenadines. And for that, we give a lot of praise. I certainly give a lot of praise to President Chavez and the Bolivarian Revolution and for the continued assistance which they have given us, because we would have been much further back. Because you see, St. Vincent is small, St. Vincent is undeveloped, St. Vincent has very little economic wherewithal. And when you contextualize that and remember that in 2008, we had an international economic and financial meltdown. And that was the same year, 2008, that Prime Minister Gonzalez announced the initiative to build the international airport. And it took some time in coming because of all of the problems, but certainly the assistance of Venezuela, the assistance of the Bolivarian Revolution, and certainly the assistance and the initiative of President Chavez was central in putting that together. So when we take all of that into consideration, I don't think that any of us can deny, even people who may be opposed to what is taking place in Venezuela, I don't think that they can deny that this relationship, the relationship between St. Vincent and Venezuela, and it is not as if our relationship with Venezuela has gone back even before the emergence of President Chavez. I think one of your presidents, President Lupinski, came here sometime. I can't remember if Carlos Andres Perez ever came, but certainly President Lipinski came when James Mitchell was the Prime Minister. So we have had a long relationship, but certainly the relationship has really consolidated with the emergence of the Bolivarian Revolution and with the triumph of President Chavez in 1999.
سيد توماس، سؤال أخير، يعني اليوم هل ترى هناك نقاط مشتركة بين العالمين العربي واللاتيني؟ تحدثت لنا يعني عن ليبيا وعن مصر وعن غيرها من الدول، هل ترى نقاط مشتركة اليوم بين العالمين؟
Well, I think that the struggle takes on many forms, many faces. It may be national, it may be regional. Sometimes it take on a religious character, class character. But I think that the struggle for the people across the world, whether it is in the Caribbean or Latin America, the Arab world or in Asia, is a similar struggle. It is a struggle for people's humanity, for people's dignity, for people's strength, for people's development. And as I said earlier, we have a world that is currently dominated by neoliberal policies. Policies that are intended to make a very small section, a very small majority of people very, very rich and powerful at the expense of the majority. And we have seen all kinds of manifestations. We saw it in different forms. The attempts, particularly in where the old order existed before the collapse of the Soviet Union. We had in Iraq and in Syria, in Palestine. There are certain efforts to keep these societies together and to ensure that they form a steadfast bulwark against certain forces which are alien and inimical to the people. We see it in our region as well, where there have been attempts, democratic attempts, alternative attempps in Grenada, in Cuba for a very long time, in Nicaragua, in efforts in El Salvador, even with President Aristide in Haiti. There are all kinds of manifestations where people are trying to fight really hard. But again, you come up against a common enemy, and how do you deal with that enemy is the fundamental question. At the turn of the century, Lenin said, what is to be done? I think that question is more pertinent now than ever before. What is to be done, and how are we going to solve the problems of these societies in the interest of the majority? Certainly, there are certain forces who want to solve the problems on the backs of the people. On the other hand, there are other people who want, other leaders, other politicians, other individuals who want to attempt to solve the problems of the countries, bearing in mind that the people, the majority of the people are the ones who are creating the wealth, and as a consequence should benefit most from it. That I think, and increasingly though, I think that we have had some reversals, but the people and leaders don't make revolutionary processes, they don't create revolutionary situations. It is the objective conditions on the ground that are going to throw up the next set of upheavals, throw up the next set of changes. I remember distinctly in 1990, 1991, following the collapse of the Soviet Union, you had, for example, the conservative political economist Franklin Fukuyama saying that we had come to the end of history. Well, history is alive and well. By 1995, we had the anti-globalization movement, and that has kept on building. And I do believe that if we look around, Arundhati Roy, the Indian thinker, says that if we listen clearly on a quiet day, we can hear the sweet sound of the new day coming. And I am a perennial optimist. I think that Che is right when he said that we are optimists because we think the impossible is possible. And I remain convinced that the world, the arc of history is in a progressive direction, in a people's direction. We may have reversals, but I'm absolutely sure that the general trajectory of humanity is towards a better life and a better existence for people. But we can sit down, We can't sit down and relax. Fidel famously said many years ago that revolutionaries cannot wait for the cops of imperialism to pass by. You have to make an effort to fight, to struggle, to change. And I do believe that's what would happen.
كل الشكر لك سيد توماس على مشاركتنا في هذه الحلقة من بودير مع نستطيع من جزيرة سان فينسنت.
Muchísimas gracias, ha sido un placer conversar con usted.
Thank you so much for having me speak to you and the people wherever your program is heard.
A ustedes también muchísimas gracias por haber estado con nosotros. Ha sido un placer acompañarlos durante este programa de Poder. Este país, San Vicente y las Granadinas, ha tomado una decisión y es que el proceso de integración va a definir el camino de su futuro. Hola, ¿qué te ha parecido San Vicente y las Granadinas?
يعني أبراهام لطالما اعتدنا على زيارة جزر معينة بقصد السياحة، لكن فعليا وجديا حان الوقت للانفتاح على عالم الجنوب والتعرف أكثر على عالم الجنوب لما يخفيه من سحر وجمال، وجزيرة سان فينسنت أكبر دليل على ذلك.
Así finalizamos. Juntos, más fuertes.
معا نستطيع. مشاهدينا الكرام
This is one of the oldest botanical gardens.
Man, Nastatia.
Juntos más fuertes.
Poder.
Poder.